My name is Bill Thomas. I'm a writer, consulting producer, and now podcaster. I am now trying to use my experience as the brother of a murder victim to help other victims of violent crime. I'm working on a book on the unsolved Colonial Parkway murders, and I'm the co-administrator of the Colonial Parkway murders Facebook group together with Kristin Dilley.
My name is Kristin Dilley. I'm a writer, a researcher, a teacher, and a victims advocate, as well as the social media manager and co-administrator for the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook page with my partner in crime, Bill Thomas. Welcome to Mind Over Murder. I'm Kristin Dilley.
And I'm Bill Thomas.
And happy Black Friday to everybody who is hopefully not out celebrating cross-commercialism and is instead at home listening to true crime podcasts.
Or holiday music and writing cards for Christmas, Kwanzaa, Hanukkah, and probably 3 or 4 other holidays I forgot about.
Yeah, or doing that too. I don't know. Everything for us is true crime. So I just automatically assume if you've got time, you're probably listening to true crime.
We hope you're listening to True Crime. We're recording this on a Friday, and it will launch on a Monday. So we hope you're having a wonderful time and enjoying this holiday season.
And we hope that everybody had a wonderful Thanksgiving if you are here in America and celebrating. And if you were not celebrating, we hope you had an excellent Thursday anyway.
Funny, I was talking to some folks in Canada the other day, and of course, they celebrate Thanksgiving, but on a different day. I don't think most people get offended, do they?
I don't think so. No, I have some Canadian friends, and they were like, cool, thank you for remembering.
Most of my Jewish friends have said to me, they don't get offended when somebody says Merry Christmas either. So someone said something nice to you. If someone said Happy Hanukkah to me, I am not Jewish, but I'd be perfectly happy to say, well, thank you. Because it's still a warm way of saying, we hope you enjoy the upcoming holidays.
Yes. And Hanukkah is on Monday. So happy Hanukkah in advance to all of our Jewish listeners and to my boyfriend who does not listen to this podcast, but I'm giving him a happy Hanukkah anyway.
But Mark,
we'll just never know it.
We were thinking of you. And you can even say we talked about him on the air and said nice things.
I will tell him. He's still not going to listen, but I will tell him.
Speaking of Thanksgiving, I know you're glowing as a result of your recent success in athleticism, running the Glowing Gobbler 5K race just the other day.
Okay, I don't know if I'd call it athleticism or anything. I just ran 3.5 miles. 3.1 miles, that's what it was. I just ran 3.1 miles. It's not a big deal. But I had fun. It was my first 5K race.
And your running partner, Charity, and you finished side by side, I think?
Yes, we did. We crossed the finish line together because we didn't want to say one of us beat the other. So we had the exact same time. And I'm not going to share what that time is because anybody who's a much better athlete would probably scoff at it. We're glad we finished. It was very cold, but we finished and we had shiny medal. And that's what counts. And we're doing another race next week and only we're doing an 8K.
And this is the Christmas Town Dash.
Yes, it's through Busch Gardens, so we get to see all the beautiful Christmas Town lights and decoration.
Is this the one where you stop every K or so and pound a beer and then continue? It's not that kind of race?
No, I'm sure there are people who would love to do that, but no, that's definitely not this race.
Okay.
But we do get to run through Busch Gardens and see the sights and all sorts of great stuff like that, so...
At the risk of sounding like a stalker, I do follow you on social media, and I did see some very nice pictures from the Glowing Gobbler 5K. You and Charity, and I keep wanting to call her Chastity, which is a whole nother thing.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun. It was great. This is like her 10th race, but it was my first actual race around people. I had done virtual 5Ks throughout the pandemic, but all that means is you do your 5K anywhere that you want, you log your time in, and you get sent a medal. This was my first race around actual human beings. It was fun, actually. I really enjoyed it. There were 800 people there.
That was one of my questions. How many actual human beings were there? 800 people. This is a lot. So everybody's having a good time. And
and not everybody ran. There were walkers and joggers, and there were people with their dogs, and everybody was wearing light up gear and funky hats and things like that. So it was a lot of fun.
I would imagine some of the top male and female runners, they get out in front and take it pretty seriously.
Yeah, the top male runner finished in 16 minutes and the top female runner finished in 20. And that will never be a time that I could get. But that's what our high school cross country runners run it in. I will never be in the shape to do that. Kudos to them. Like, we were a mile out and the people who were finishing first were already on their way back. I was like, all right, good for you.
Show offs.
You get to go have your bowl of chili and your beer before all the rest of us do.
Absolutely. Sounds like a great time, and we wish you all the best at the Christmastown Dash.
It's next weekend, so I think we will.
We also wanted to remind everybody, we hope you had a chance to listen to our recent holiday gift guide with suggestions and ideas for things that you might want to buy for the true crime fan on your list.
That was so much fun to do. I'm so glad you let me do it. It was great.
Oh, it was really fun. And then also, you may have noticed that we went back and we're rerunning some episodes from earlier in the podcast, our 2 editions of True Crime Bookshelf.
Really, you're never going to run out of book suggestions as long as you're listening to Mind Over Murder, because you've got me, the crazy book lady, always offering recommendations.
As always, we want to thank you for your support. Don't forget that you can buy merch, t-shirts, mugs, sweatshirts, onesies,
hoodies,
stickers. What else am I
wall
forgetting?
Hangings.
Oh, wall hangings.
They're wall hangings. Yeah. I got a nice little tote bag that I've been going back and forth to school with. I was looking at all this morning. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff.
So that's all available at TeePublic, and they're having a 35% off sale. We're having a Black Friday sale just like everybody else.
I'm actually going to finish up here, go put up my Christmas tree, and then go order some merch just for me.
And speaking of Christmas, as we speak on this Friday afternoon, we're having snow flurries in Connecticut. I can see them out the window. White, flaky, not completely welcome from my point of view.
I was going to say, holy cow, that's...
But we'll put on some Christmas music after we finish the podcast, and we'll try to get into the spirit. We've been having a wonderful time, and there's a lot of good baking going on, so I have absolutely nothing to complain about or to leave the house for at this point.
What is Pamela baking?
Oh my gosh, she made these amazing pies, and she's been making bread, and it smells awfully good in here. Oliver, the dachshund, and I keep wandering into the kitchen saying, smells good around here. We find that heaping the praise on the chef has all sorts of additional benefits.
Oh, I'd imagine so. That sounds tremendously wonderful.
So pumpkin pie last night.
So all of our fans should consider booking at your Airbnb in order to get some of Pamela's really fantastic French meat pie.
Well, I don't recall that we've ever served the French meat pie to any non-family members, but I don't want to sign Pamela up for anything else that she's not already doing. We wanted to thank everybody once again for all of your support and your outstanding ratings and reviews on your favorite podcast platforms. Just picture Kristin glowing in the afterglow of the Glowing Gobbler 5K, in addition to stellar reviews. And Kristin gave me permission to read one.
Yeah.
All right.
Please do. It sounds wonderful.
Okay, here we go. Here's a recent review, and this is the kind of thing we want to inspire. Easy to listen to, 5 stars. The hosts' voices are super easy and a delight to listen to. The method of questioning the families of the murdered and missing victims of the Colonial Parkway murders is done with diplomacy and care. I've found my podcast. Thank you so much. So we really appreciate that kind of review. It's very kind. We hope to continue to rise to that level of praise.
Very much. Thank you so very much. And thank you to everybody who continues to write in and to comment on our social media pages. We appreciate it more than we can tell you. We are going to return back to a subject that we covered in some depth a number of weeks ago, but we did have some things that we'd like to return to with this particular subject, and that is the shooting on the set of the movie Rust. To recap very briefly what happened, for those of you that may have forgotten a little bit of the detailed information, let me just run a quick summary here before turning it over to Mr. Thomas, who is our current expert on all things related to Hollywood and film. 16 crew members and cast were working on a low-budget Western movie titled Rust at the Bonanza Creek Ranch in Santa Fe, New Mexico. It's our understanding that that's been used for a number of movies and TV shows. On October 21st, an accidental shooting took the life of cinematographer Halyna Hutchins and injured director Joel Souza. Actor and producer Alec Baldwin was holding the gun when it accidentally discharged a live round, striking both Hutchins and Souza. In the weeks since this shooting, what has continued to happen with lawsuits and fallout?
First of all, the production itself for Rust has halted. Nothing is happening in terms of additional shooting days for the film itself. Lawsuits are now being filed.
Mm-hmm.
The first is by script supervisor Mamie Mitchell, and she's filed a lawsuit against Alec Baldwin, both as producer and star of Rust. She's a veteran script supervisor who has worked on nearly 100 film and television productions. Let me explain what a script supervisor does. A script supervisor is on set. They're often women. I can't say why, but almost every script supervisor I've ever met is a woman. It's a very important and detailed job. This individual is there to make certain that every line of dialogue and every point of action in the movie is actually shot. Because remember, it's difficult to go back later and recreate something that happened on set. Her job is to make certain that everything that is supposed to be shot for the film is shot and that it's done correctly. That is, they're following the dialogue as written. There may be ad libs and that sort of thing, but her job is to make certain that all of this stuff happens. This also makes the script supervisor essential for continuity because movies and television shows are often shot out of order. So there'll be a setting for a particular moment in time, and then they may return to that days or even weeks later to finish that particular event. There are time jumps in movies and television shows that happen all the time. The script supervisor has to make certain that all of the elements are there and that there's some degree of continuity from one take to the next.
And so this is someone who would be on set every single day, considered essential to the process, and would have seen everything that was going on set.
Right.
Okay. She has filed suit against Alec Baldwin, producer and star. What does that lawsuit allege Baldwin of doing or not doing during the production?
Well, first and most importantly, Mamie Mitchell accuses Alec Baldwin of violating safety protocols. And her lawsuit also names armorer Hannah Gutierrez-Reed and assistant director David Halls. Now, it's Halls who handed the gun to Baldwin, and he's the one that called out cold gun, which is industry speak for this gun is safe to handle and does not contain live ammunition. She also names other production companies, Rust Productions, who are the direct production company for this film, and other producers by name in her lawsuit, which has just been filed.
Probably the most stunning thing that she accuses Alec Baldwin of, the kind that sort of sent shivers up my spine, is she accuses Alec Baldwin of playing Russian roulette with a loaded firearm. That blows my mind that someone would do something like that on the set of a movie.
And when she says Russian roulette in her lawsuit, she doesn't mean literally spinning a gun and holding it to his or someone else's head.
I should hope not. Wow.
What she means, though, is that, and remember, she's the script supervisor, there is no gunfire called for in the scene they were shooting that day.
I see.
Her lawsuit clearly states that Baldwin did not need to cock and fire his weapon in the scene they were filming. Remember, this is a six-shooter, an old-fashioned gun like you'd see in a Western that requires you to cock the handle back so that the firing pin strikes the bullet in the chamber, which is a six-shooter, that spins around. She says that the scene they were shooting that day called for 3 tight shots of Alec Baldwin, one on his eyes, one on a blood stain on his shoulder, and one on his body as he pulls the gun from his holster. So there is no gunfire. She says that he recklessly fired the gun at a time and a place that he didn't need to. Filming protocol using guns always says the same thing, and our friend Bobby Chacon has mentioned this in interviews he's done recently in print and on television. You always treat a weapon, even a prop weapon, as a deadly weapon, and you are never to aim a gun at someone that you do not wish to kill or destroy. You're always to treat the weapon, even a prop, as a real gun and a gun that's loaded with real ammunition, as it was tragically in this example.
Unbelievable. We know Mamie Mitchell has filed a lawsuit, but are there any others? I would almost have to assume that there are other lawsuits that have either come of this or are going to come of this.
Well, there are for certain. Something I should mention, one other party that Mitchell mentions in her lawsuit is armorer Halyna Gutierrez Reed, in addition to David Halls, the assistant director who handed him the gun. There are additional lawsuits that have now been filed. Head of lighting on the film, a man named Serge Savetnoy, has also filed lawsuits against Baldwin and the other parties. He was a very close friend of Halyna Hutchins, who's the director of photography, the cinematographer. They had done 9 films together. They were very close friends. He was actually doing the film at a low rate of pay as a favor to friend Halyna Hutchins, and he actually had the sad task of holding her head while she died after she'd been shot by Alec Baldwin. Now, he also adds in his lawsuit that he saw guns and ammunition unattended on the set, which is a major violation of safety protocol. And that steers back to Halyna Gutierrez Reed. She's the armorer on the film, and she's responsible for guns, ammo, and of course, gun safety.
And just to remind our listening audience, Halyna Gutierrez Reed is 24 years old, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, she's 24 years old. I have to say, I think she was grossly unqualified for this role. She's responsible, as we discussed, for all the guns and ammo. She's only working on her second movie, and there had been problems on her first movie, another Western with Nicolas Cage called The Old Way. And according to the Los Angeles Times, a key grip on The Old Way, and the key grip is her supervisor, he said that she had mishandled weapons on set. And I'd like to quote him directly. Quote, "There's a universal way to handle weapons on set, and immediately red flags went up when I worked with Hannah," Stu Brumbaugh said. Quote, "This is why I asked for her dismissal." This is on The Old Way, her first movie. "This is why people get injured, because of rookie mistakes," unquote. Among other examples of safety violations, he said the rookie armorer fired a gun near actor Nicolas Cage without any announcement, causing Cage to scream at her and angrily leave the set. He was wearing headphones, as you often do, so you can hear what's going on and hear what's being recorded. Apparently, she fired a gun, and he tore off his headphones and swore at her and said, "You blew out my blank eardrums," and stormed off set. Nicolas Cage wanted her fired, and Stu Brumbaugh, her supervisor, also wanted her fired.
Well, the question for me is, why would you put such an inexperienced person in such an important role, especially one that is related to major safety issues on the set? Why would you do such a thing?
Well, this is the stuff that's coming out now. It appears they were cutting corners to save money on a low-budget film. This is a roughly $7 million budget, which is quite low for a full-length motion picture. What they're finding is that movie and television producers, set managers, crew members, and actors are all saying that demand has outstripped the level of experienced crew in New Mexico. See, there's a lot going on with tax incentives in the film and television industry. A number of different states around the country have created tax incentives to draw film and television productions to their locations because they provide good jobs, high-paying jobs, and they are a significant boost to the economy. And unlike a brick-and-mortar business, let's say you and I started a business, doesn't matter what it is, a factory, a store, what have you. Once you've established a physical presence in a particular location, it's difficult and expensive for you to then up and move your business, your physical brick and mortar type business, from one state to another as a result of tax incentives. You're listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll be right back after this word from our sponsors. Many of you know that Othram is leading the way in DNA testing, helping law enforcement solve missing persons, homicides, and sexual assault cases across the United States and Canada using forensic-grade DNA tests.
You can help this important cause by contributing funds and your DNA profile to Othrum's free site, DNAsolves.com. The process is easy and confidential. Just 2 simple steps.
Now DNA Solves has added another new feature, DNA Solves Connect, which will allow you to upload your DNA profile to help law enforcement, even if you've never used one of the commercial genealogy sites.
If you're looking for a missing family member or have lost touch with someone, DNA Solves Connect is an incredible option at only $14.95.
Upload your DNA profile to DNAsolves.com.
Join Mind Over Murder as we help families find answers with Othram and DNAsolves.com.
We're back here at Mind Over Murder. Film and television production is actually highly mobile. And for years, people have used various locales in California, New York, and elsewhere to double for settings around the country. So, you'd watch a TV show or a movie, and it might have been shot in California or in New York, for example. Even if the movie or television show was set in, I'm just making this up, New Orleans, let's say. Rust is being shot in New Mexico as a result of tax incentives. The film is actually based in Kansas and is ironically about an accidental shooting in the 1800s. But here's New Mexico doubling for 1800s Kansas, and this happens a lot. So because film and television is highly mobile and you can move productions around, there's a lot of demand now for experienced film and television crew in places like New Mexico, and there are not enough people living in New Mexico who have the qualifications necessary to do these jobs.
So I would imagine that the experienced crew are probably going to the big producers like Netflix, Universal, those sorts of things. Would I be right on that?
Exactly. And there's also, of course, a compensation issue here. A lot of film and television production people live in New York, Los Angeles. Atlanta has turned into a major production center, again, because of tax incentives. There's an economic incentive for those experienced crew members to work for the major producers because the major producers are making bigger budget projects. They pay better. Many of the what they call below the line people in film and television, who are almost all of the people who are not appearing on camera, the cinematographers, the electricians, the prop people, the armorers, the drivers, there are dozens and dozens of jobs, good jobs, that involve working on film and television production, but don't involve appearing on camera as an actor.
Sure.
A film like Rust with a $7 million budget is considered a low-budget film and pays less on a daily basis than a top-tier production, a full-budget production. So if you had the opportunity to work on a Marvel movie that's $20 or $50 million, the compensation for everyone, including the below-the-line crew, is significantly higher than it would be for a movie like Rust. So if you're given an opportunity, you're probably going to go with the major film production, the major television show, before you're going to go with a movie like Rust. Rust is in what they call Tier 1 of the IATSE, that's the below-the-line unions, low-budget film agreement. And experienced crews will often not work on these smaller, lower-paying projects, especially now post-pandemic, at least we hope post-pandemic. Crews are extremely busy. And so the top people are taking the top jobs, and then that leaves fewer people available to take these low-budget jobs. This is where you run into problems using a mix of union crews, IATSE members, and non-union crews. One of the reasons why they hired someone like Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, a highly inexperienced person as head armorer, is driven strictly by financial considerations.
Now, it's also my understanding that there were some labor issues on the set, and it sounds like maybe that could have contributed to some of the problems and turbulence on that set as well.
Alec Baldwin was quoted as saying that they were a smooth running machine. But the reports
doesn't sound like it.
No, it sure doesn't. Now remember, Alec Baldwin is also a producer and a star. Producers are responsible ultimately for what happens on set. Baldwin's assurances notwithstanding, the reports that came out from the set of Rust were of a troubled production. Rust had a 21-day shooting schedule that started October 6th, and then, of course, it ended abruptly after the shooting of Halyna Hutchins and Joel Souza. It shouldn't be lost on anybody that key members of the camera crew, these are the folks that worked for Halyna Hutchins, had walked off set that morning, just a few hours before the 1:30 p.m. accidental shooting. They had complained, these are crew members, experienced crew members, IATSE members, they had complained about safety violations regarding protocol. There had been 2 accidental discharges of weapons on set, which is indications of a lack of safety focus. And then, of course, the crew complained about accommodations which were very far from set, which resulted in significantly longer drive times between Bonanza Ranch, where the production was taking place, and where they're staying, which required a nearly 1-hour drive each way. Now, keep in mind, you're working very long hours as it is, 10, 12-hour days, and then you're tacking on longer commutes than are necessary for these crew members who were already extremely tired from long days and a lot of hours on their feet. There had been a walkout that morning, and they were continuing production with a mix of union and non-union crews. I think your point about labor unrest possibly contributing to the atmosphere on set, I think, is extremely important.
Now, one other person that I don't think we should forget to talk about here is Dave Halls, who was the AD on this shoot. Let's talk a little bit about his role in this whole entire thing, just so that we can spread the blame around equally,
Well, and I think this will happen even in court. Halls is the person who handed the gun to Baldwin and said, "cold gun," thus announcing to the 16 people on set, this is a safe weapon and is safe to handle. Inside this church, where the 3 shots are going to be completed, only one person is appearing on camera. So you've got 15 other people surrounding Alec Baldwin in their various roles. Only Alec Baldwin is appearing on camera during that afternoon's production. Halls hands the gun to Baldwin with the assurance that the weapon is safe, and yet later admits in an affidavit that he didn't check the weapon, which is completely a violation of protocol. In addition to the problems we talked about with Halyna Gutierrez-Reed, the armorer, Halls was fired in 2019 from a film called Freedom's Path after a crew member had a minor and temporary injury when a prop gun unexpectedly discharged on that set. So here's a guy who has more experience than Halyna Gutierrez-Reed, but he's ultimately responsible for the gun being handed to Baldwin, and he shows up with problems in a movie made 2 years ago. And then he admitted that he didn't check the gun properly before handing it to Baldwin. I see all kinds of problems there as well.
One of the, I would say, probably most experienced and well-known actors in Hollywood at this point, George Clooney, had several things that he wanted to say about the accidental shooting on Rust. He was quite critical about the production. So let's go into what George Clooney had to say with regard to what actually happened on this set.
Clooney's one of the few people that I've seen so far that's spoken out on the record about the Rust shooting. He did a podcast a couple of weeks ago, and he was asked about the shooting, and he offered his point of view. He said that most importantly, that inexperienced producers, that is Rust Productions, Alec Baldwin and Partners, should have hired an armorer with more experience because this group of producers, independent producers, low-budget producers, and not people with a tremendous track record in terms of making movies, should have hired an armorer that had significantly more experience than Halyna Gutierrez-Reed. Clooney stated that when he's filmed Westerns, which he has in the past, that using 6-shooters, as we talked about, an old-fashioned revolver like you see in a Western, Even after he is handed the gun, he then takes the weapon, and this is his own personal policy. He fires it into the ground 6 times to go through the full cylinder to make sure that the weapon is clear of any bullets or dangerous objects in the barrel. He'd rather have the gun go off and fire into the ground, hopefully hurting no one, than hold a gun out as you would in an action film or a Western and potentially hurt someone. And of course, Clooney has experience in this regard because he was friends with Brandon Lee, who was killed in a gun accident on the set of the film called The Crow back in 1993.
I do remember that in particular. That was an awful tragedy. And you would think that everyone acting in Hollywood at that point would have taken note. This is what happens when, live ammunition and live guns are used on set in this way. I can't for the life of me understand why his policy isn't everybody's policy. That's terrifying to me. Even just the idea of having a live gun on set gives me the willies. Oh my goodness.
Investigators from the Santa Fe Sheriff's Department that are looking into this tragedy have already said that they found over 500 rounds of ammunition. Now, that doesn't mean they were all live ammunition. There was a mix of blanks and what they call dummy bullets and live ammunition, which should have never happened. And they found at least 500 rounds, although they're not saying how many of those rounds were live rounds. There were live rounds, which is a complete violation, again, of safety protocols. This should have never happened. There should never be live ammunition on the set of a movie or a television show.
Now, some of the articles I was reading, especially a series of interviews that Hannah Gutierrez-Reed put out after the incident, she floated the idea, or maybe it was her attorney, they floated the idea that there was sabotage of some variety on set and that she had no idea how live rounds got onto the set, which is not something I would admit if I were an armorer, but that's just me. Any thoughts on that idea that someone was out to sabotage the set?
There was labor unrest, and I'll at least put this out there that there's the possibility that someone wanted to embarrass Alec Baldwin and his producing partners by introducing live ammunition onto the set. As we discussed, there were 2 other accidental discharges of weapons in the earlier production days on the set of Rust. I can't rule it out. So far, the law enforcement investigators from the Santa Fe Sheriff's Department and the district attorney have said they found no evidence of sabotage on the set of Rust.
As you and I have talked about recently, and I think more recently in the last couple of days, it sounds like a plausible story. Sure, somebody sabotaged this set to get back at Alec Baldwin. But as you and I have talked about, not everything needs to be a conspiracy. It's an interesting story, but doesn't it seem more likely that you have an inexperienced armorer who was in over her head, didn't have control of the set, didn't have control of the guns? I think people tend to like a good story, but I don't think that behind every horrible accident is an interesting story. I don't tend to think there was sabotage. I tend to think she was an inexperienced person who lost control of her set. But that's just me.
Yours is a reasonable explanation. There's also something that was mentioned in the early going, and I haven't seen an update on this. I've been watching for this. Some crew members said that after hours, the members of the crew were going out and plinking, that is shooting bottles and cans out in the desert, offset, using some of the same weapons that would have been used on set. That is very problematic as well. Again, that doesn't necessarily steer you towards sabotage or any kind of conspiracy, but just sloppiness, which is, I think, what you're getting at. There's something that's very important. The head armorer is usually, from everything I've heard and read and seen, are usually highly experienced people who've been around guns for decades and are very no-nonsense about safety and the need for safety protocols. Hannah Gutierrez-Reed has been criticized repeatedly on 2 films for failing to hold safety meetings and for failing to impose the kind of strict controls over firearms and ammunition that need to be in force in a situation like this where you have dozens of people working around weapons which could be very dangerous and have proven to be fatal in several examples in the last 20 years or so, including the shooting of Brandon Lee. George Clooney, by the way, mentioned that a very dear friend of his and a cousin, Miguel Ferrer, who has since passed, a very well-known actor. Ferrer, who is Clooney's cousin, was very good friends with Brandon Lee, and as a matter of fact was going to be Brandon Lee's best man at his wedding, which was 2 weeks after shooting for the film The Crow was to be completed.
Oh, gosh.
They moved in the same social circles. George Clooney had said he thought that back in 1993, when Brandon was accidentally killed, that things had gotten better and that people were significantly more careful with the use of firearms and ammunition on set. Clearly, in this example, on the set of Rust, corners were cut, inexperienced people, and people with a track record of significant violations of safety protocols were in place in jobs that they probably shouldn't have been.
So what ultimately is this going to mean for Alec Baldwin and his producing partners? I assume this means they can be found liable in these various lawsuits that have been put out.
I think it's a very good chance that they will be found liable. I'd like to return to the Los Angeles Times for a moment. University of Southern California Gould School of Law professor Gregory Keating told the Los Angeles Times, quote, "Somebody has to have been negligent. Quote, this doesn't happen without negligence. There are safety protocols that are supposed to be followed. It's really just a matter of who's negligent and how the responsibility gets parceled out," unquote. So he's saying a lot. He's saying basically this shooting wouldn't have happened without negligence. I'm not certain where this leaves Rust and Rust Productions and Alec Baldwin and his partners. But as I said earlier, this terrible tragedy took place on their set, a movie they were paying for and paying all of the staff, cast and crew. The buck stops there. I would be very surprised if they are not found to have been negligent and at least partially responsible for the death of Halyna Hutchins and the wounding of director Joel Souza.
Well, that's going to do it for our coverage of the Rust shooting. Thank you, Mr. Bill Thomas, our resident expert on all things film, television, Hollywood, entertainment, you name it. We appreciate your insight as always.
Well, thank you. As always, I'll remind everybody I'm not a lawyer, however. Sadly, this situation will likely take some time to unfold, and let's see how the legal process moves forward.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Mind Over Murder. We'll see you next time. Mind Over Murder is a production of Absolute Zero and Another Dog Productions.
Our executive producers are Bill Thomas and Kristin Dilley.
Our logo art is by Pamela Arnois.
Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod.
Mind Over Murder is distributed in partnership with Crawlspace Media.
You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
You can also follow our page on the Colonial Parkway Murders on Facebook.
And finally, you can follow Bill Thomas on Twitter at BillThomas56.
Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder.